record it to the cloud. Here we go. Welcome everyone. This is an amazing opportunity. It's quite actually surreal to be able to connect to so many people across the net and from Canada and Sweden to have our main guests here. So before I start, this is recorded. We are going to share it hopefully across different channels, but if you guys want to have a copy, then we can also give you access to it. I know that there are quite a lot of students from architecture, geography. I've had quite a lot of people from anthropology, from everywhere. Film, basically logging into this, as well as community people, members of staff across the country, and professors that I know in the field that I can see a couple of faces here. Lovely to have you. So welcome all. I'm going to be looking up and down because I've got this thing stuck on my wall just to remind me not to skip anything. So said about the muting as well. So if you come in, mute yourself so that we can all hear Leilani and Fredrik speak clearly. I'm going to introduce myself. So I'm your host. My name is Sana Murrani. I am an associate professor in spatial practice, post-conflict, and with a background in architecture. And I'm also the founder of the Displacement Studies Research Network, which is organizing this event as part of Refugee Week. I must thank my PhD student, Sally Sutton. Sally, wave so that people will see you. You've done a lot of work. Sally did an amazing work trying to get everything working together with Fredrik's team. Sally's PhD is actually bang on very similar issues. So her work deals with the kind of the changing of the role of the River Thames and the impact of the communities who are living on the river, dwelling on the river, and how they've been kind of moved. So this is the mooring communities that are now being kind of moved and shoved into and into privatization and all kinds. I must thank the funding for this. So this event has been funded and supported by the architecture and the research and the arts research areas within the School of Art, Design and Architecture at University of Plymouth, which is where we're speaking from. And we are going to kind of talk about the ideas through this. I have a couple of questions to ask both guests, but I will introduce them first. So really, we are absolutely delighted to have Leilani Farha with us today, and Fredrik Gretten. And I would like to ask, and I'm going to read this so that I won't make a mistake. By the way, Leilani is joining us from Canada, and Fredrik is joining us from Sweden. So we have an international event, I can say. Fredrik, was it your intention from the start to design the film for the audience to be guided by Leilani's work and contribution? And for Leilani, just before you start, so that I can shut up after this, we would love to hear what happened after the making of the film with the Shift movement. Thank you.
Now you're really shooting us up for at least half an hour here. That's not a problem. When I was developing this film, I didn't know about Leilani. And I do a lot of my research through Twitter, where I can find a lot of people talking about these issues. And of course, I had to follow the UN Special Rapporteur on Adequate Housing, which then happened to be Leilani Farha. I knew that the previous rapporteur, Raquel Rolnik, was actually in my previous film called Bike versus Cars. So I was a little bit aware of the function and so on. But I read Leilani was interviewed in a Vancouver newspaper, and there was a line that really interested me. And after some time, I actually contacted her and asked if we could talk. And then we had a Skype. And then I could understand, then I saw that, wow, this is something more than just an expert. This is like a human being with a drive to understand something, which kind of is also, you know, I'm not an academic. I respect the academics, but I'm for me, it's like putting simple questions out there, and maybe you'll even also try to find simple answers. So the simple question is, why are the prices going up everywhere? And Leilani was basically also looking for the same thing. She had already found that this is about financialization. But what does that really mean? So when we actually, the first shoot we do, of course, I asked her if she's coming over to Europe, and we met in London, and we actually met in the apartment of Saskia Sassen. That's where the first time we met. I had already made most of the interview with Saskia, and then Leilani arrived late, straight from the airport with all the bags, and we filmed a few days, and then I went back to my editor, and we checked if it
Hi,
worked.
It's Jenny Cole
worked really well on the film.
I think you just called me back, but the phone went down.
So and then Leilani had an official mission to Chile a month later, and I speak Spanish and I worked a lot in Chile, and I also have a good network there. So I decided to follow and to shoot there, and then I also shot in Canada. So with these 3 stops, I started to shape a film and also to fund the film, because that's an adventure in itself. So, but I mean, I must say I've been doing films for 25 years, but Leilani has been like the most interesting cooperation I had, because we in many ways, we ended up having the same mission, the mission of trying to understand what is going on out there. So she became my private detective, I mean, in the film, but also we became some kind of partners in this game too. And as you see, we are appearing here together. The film premiered more than a year ago, and we've been out a lot with the film together and also individually. The film has been playing in many countries, and it's part of the debate and changing the language in many countries. And of course, Leilani, you should talk more about the impact of the film. So
yeah, I'll jump in. Sure, why not? One thing I do love, you know, as you get some distance from a project, and I love the idea, as Fredrik described it, of how it happened, that he's off in his world thinking about these issues, and I'm off in my world thinking about these issues, and then somehow we find each other, and then he makes this brilliant film, and it changes an entire discourse, actually, and better than that, it's changing how governments are acting, and it's changing how people are interacting with housing and financialization. I think it's actually very cool. And what's super cool is that both, I think, Fredrik and I have this sense of there's still more to learn. We're still learning. We're still engaged in the big project of understanding these actors and figuring out the damage done and what can be done about it. So it's been a super cool ride or journey, as they say, that's ongoing, which I'm enjoying very much. And funnily enough, I would say that Fredrik is like helping to guide the shift to some degree. I rely on his instincts. He didn't mention, I don't think, but he's a journalist. He was a journalist before a documentary filmmaker, and he's got those journalist instincts, which are really helpful, which few people would realize how helpful those instincts are for building a movement. He also reads widely, like reading landscapes, which is super important, and I do that too. So since the film, The Shift, well, I mean, you know, God, if I'd known the impact the film was going to have, yeah, I went into it blind. I just knew that a film, well, when I figured out who Fredrik was and that he makes really good films, I realized, shit, like this is an opportunity, because I'm one person and with, at the time, with this huge mandate, but just one person, a film can go here, there, and everywhere that I can't go, can reach hundreds and thousands of people that I can't reach. And you know, I preach a lot to the converted often, or people who are just, you know, sort of, but the film can reach people who are just interested in cities, or just, you know, interested in Fredrik Gretten, or etc. So the film, if I'd known that the film would do so well, that it would be so popular, that it would win awards, I then could have predicted that the shift might become of interest to people. I didn't predict any of it, and I was caught a little bit like a deer in headlights. Like, oh shit, I have to take the shift really seriously now because they are all taking it super seriously. So I've ramped up the shift as a result of Push. I've had no choice. I mean, at the end of every screening, people are like, I want to be involved in this shift. I mean, that's the sign of a good documentary, right? It galvanizes people because they're like, oh, this film has affected me. It enters people in a way, I think. And housing is very peculiarly intimate topic, which I think both Fredrik and I have found, that the film bridges for people this intimate feeling they have with their home and with this political, economic, and social reality. That's the brilliance of the film, actually, in my opinion. So the shift exists now, and I am its global director. I segued out of being rapporteur at the end of April, and now I'm directing it. We have some really cool projects. We're working really closely with cities around the world to try to get city governments to understand what the right to housing means and how they can push back against these big financial actors. Yeah, and Fredrik and I are thinking of starting a podcast on the issue. I think Fredrik should talk about that, not me. There's lots of cool stuff happening with the shift. What we're trying to do is build our base. Excuse the expression, I don't mean to sound like Donald Trump, but we do need to, the idea is that it would be lots of different actors, you know, not just the usual human rights people, but architects and urban planners and financial people. I've just started to have the financial people come my way. They've started to contact me to say, I'm a progressive financial person, how can I help?
It's brilliant. I think that do you feel a lot of it was pushed and helped by your previous work with the UN and the network that you had? Or was it in isolation of that, or on top of that?
I think it's the film.
The film.
Actually, I mean, of course, as rapporteur, my profile got higher, but the film is what I think increased my profile or changed my profile, made me more accessible. I mean, I'm an accessible person, but I think the film showed that. And I think the film is being shown so many places. So I have no access to some of these progressive financial people. That's the film.
Yeah. And Fredrik, just really quickly on bananas, because I think it moves on really nicely from your previous documentary into this. Now, the only difference is this one touches on an incredibly personal kind of to everyone, right? So, you know, with bananas, it's, you know, the plantation, it's a one company, it's a big thing, it's a, you know, a revealing of a hidden kind of injustice to a particular part of society. With this, it just touches on absolutely every single step. So where are you heading after Push from there?
That's a challenge. That's always the challenge. What should I do next? I mean, I was dreaming to go to a tropical island to just be in a hammock or something like that, but they don't let me out, so I don't know.
You've already been to the beach today. You just told me.
I have been to the beach here in Malmö. It's nice, so I'm good. Yeah, I guess I have to make more films, but it's normally I don't really talk about the project before they're clear in my own eyes. That takes some time.
Yeah.
You know, I have to go. You know, as Leilani said, I'm trying to read landscapes, and I'm really interested in doing that. I mean, I'm doing that constantly. But then, it's like the entry point in a new story. That's a challenge. I mean, like this one, it's in one way a very complicated world, But on the other hand, it's not that complicated as the experts say. The experts always tend to say that this is extremely complicated. You don't understand, like the financial people would say. So of course, I think we can deconstruct their complexities into something that we can understand, and that's what I need to do also if I make a new film, to find a way how to understand what's cooking out there, because there's a lot of things cooking, and society is changing, and we don't always notice. I mean, because this is so obvious that what you see in Push is the effect of how they solved the 2008 financial crisis.
Absolutely.
This is what we're all suffering of. But when I started to do this film, I didn't know about it, and other journalists didn't know about it, and politicians didn't know about it, and governments didn't know about it. The people who knew about this were people sitting out, very often working class, people out in poorer neighborhoods. They knew that this was happening, but they couldn't explain it. They just felt it in their bodies. So I think this is probably happening now also after, in this COVID crisis, which is also a financial crisis, or no, the financial markets, they're better than ever, but it is a crisis for the people. So there is a lot. I mean, we should all be focused on how the big actors, what they are doing now, what steps they are taking, and how the government's relief packets are actually supporting the guys who already are too strong. So this is something where you in the academia should really be there now and help people to understand what's going on. And of course, also filmmakers have to be there in some way.
We try to engage in a similar way with the Shift is trying. So basically engage with stakeholders in exactly the same, at the same level. We try to engage with the communities that are affected, but also with stakeholders, with organizations, with authorities, and have that one level of power sharing. But it's very difficult. I mean, there is research being funded on this as we speak, but it's really interesting to look at it that way. I tell you, after I watched the film, the first thing I wanted to look at is, where is this contribution for my teacher's pension going? I was really curious to know, what are they doing with the money that they're sucking from every single member of staff across it's really interesting.
Yeah, when you find out, it will be quite kind of depressing, because you'll find out that your own pension is making your own life more expensive.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
So even if your pension is growing, your costs will also grow at the same rate. And then there will be middlemen taking a big piece of the pie. And the names of them are Blackstones or others, that's the issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there would be a few pension funds that aren't contributing to residential real estate as a form of investment and return for pensioners. Yeah, so that's good. That's good, actually, for the shift and for a movement. That's super good, because we can mobilize people who receive pensions, because it so directly is going to affect them. I mean, the film itself shows at the end, there's the fellow who's like, I can't afford my place, and it's my pension that's making my life unaffordable, as Fredrik just said. So that, for me, as an activist looking for inroads to make change, that's the perfect place, actually. And the environmentalists have been doing that, going after pension funds, making sure they don't invest in dirty things. So we can do the same thing.
And I was interviewed by a local newspaper here today, and it's a little town south of Malmö where they're selling out part of the public stock of apartments, and the people buying them is a company. And I asked them to track their background, and of course, none of them are coming from the housing business. So it's all the the new players on the housing market are people who had never been into housing before. So Blackstone entered 2011, 2012. Now they are the biggest landlord on the planet. And there's a lot of other guys coming from the Wall Street, like bingo market, it's like they have nothing to do. They only know this is a place where we can grow money. And they enter and they leave. It's like it's quick 4 or 5 year boom. And you asked Leilani before about the impact of the film, and we can see that legislators in some countries are actually trying to do something. So now in a few weeks, the 1st of July, Denmark will have a new legislation, and it's actually informally called Lex Blackstone, which is like interesting because we had a world premiere of the film in Copenhagen, and Leilani made a communication to Blackstone and also to the Danish government. So the issue became really big in Denmark. We actually had protests outside one of the venues of the showing of the film, because Blackstone had bought a lot of apartments in Copenhagen, and they were really turning the market up and down. So now the government it's now coming up a 5-year rent cap in Denmark. Also a lot of other details in this, but it basically will make it harder for hedge funds to go in and go out in the short term. Berlin has also taken a 5-year rent cap with some other regulations, and the big actors like Blackstone, Vonovia, and others are complaining. But of course, when they complain in Berlin, they will go somewhere else where there is less governments acting.
Regulations, yeah.
But this is happening now. So governments and cities feel we want the cities to, like the Danish housing minister says, we want the city to be also for the bus drivers and the nurses. It's like, well, I think that's actually fair. And now they're acting on it. And if Blackstone wants to be in Denmark, they have to behave like a Danish company. So this is happening, and this is very much thanks to the work of Leilani. I would say what Leilani is doing in the film and in her work is actually a very simple thing, pointing out the basic human rights of an adequate home, of a safe home. And politics is also language. And the language is very often written by the lobbyists, the think tanks, and they have for many years now said housing market housing.
Yeah.
And Leilani is actually shifting the language back to housing is a human right. And governments have the legal obligation to honor that. I've been following this for a while now. I see groups, also members of parliament, using this language. Leilani's language is now coming through everywhere, on every continent. So this is like, it's spreading very quick. And that's thanks to the very clear and simple message from Leilani. A simple but strong message.
Brilliant. On this note, I would like to open it to the rest of the floor. So if for those of you who would like to ask a question, please introduce yourself first. So who would like to ask a question? Yes. Yes, Roseanne. I can't hear you, Roseanne. We can't hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Still can't hear you.
She's still muted.
Mute. Okay. My question is to say the solution seems to be for capping, as suggested in the Denmark legislative. But is there any power foreseen for local councils to intervene, or even government to intervene before Blackstone and the others take over? Is there any protective facility that can happen in advance of the problem?
I'll jump in if that's fine. Thanks, Roseanne. Yeah, absolutely. Governments have created a really nice environment for these actors, hedge funds, et cetera, to come in and do what they're doing. And so it's pretty easy to clean up that. For example, they get preferential tax rates. The way in which this all unfolds really is through these things called real estate investment trusts. You don't really need to know how they work. I don't totally understand it, but they basically group together a whole bunch of different properties and mortgages all together. And people then basically get shares in this new real estate investment trust. Those trusts are exempt from taxation, basically. So that's what makes it so lucrative. So you could governments could just simply get rid of the tax advantage of REITs. Now I make it sound super simple, but you have to understand that all of the, and the film shows this, right? All of this is, residential real estate is the biggest business of all businesses in the world. It's bigger than tobacco. It's bigger than gold. It's bigger than any other business. So what I make it sound simple: close the tax loops, make it harder, make the environment more difficult. This stuff is a major part of most gross domestic product, GDP of most countries. The global value of residential real estate is $163 trillion. It's huge. So when I'm suggesting to a government that they change the tax code, that will actually affect their GDP as they understand it. So it's not, it's an easy fix, but it's a difficult political fix, because we have to convince the politicians that there are human rights issues at play here, and that this is a matter of life and death in some circumstances.
I have a private question, I think, to you, Leilani, again. So the person is saying, I love the documentary. It's both inspiring and alarming. What can we do to help or get involved with the shift movement? How can communities start to buy back properties like we saw in Push?
Well, I mean, it's actually a question for both Fredrik and I, because the film plays such an important role in this too. Getting the film out, and Fredrik maybe can speak about that, and how people can get the film out and use it as a mobilizing tool. That's super important. People need to see this film. Because people don't know the issue, and those who are experiencing it, as we said already, both Fredrik and I, people are afraid to talk about housing because they're embarrassed. They're embarrassed they can't pay their rent. They think it's personal when it's actually this big structural thing. I'll put in the chat box on the right the URL for Make the Shift. I mean, I really want, shifters to start emerging in different communities all around, and attached to me and my entity and using my tools, etc., but doing advocacy on the ground. There are so many cool things happening in this regard. I mean, I think Berlin and Barcelona are two cities where advocates at the local level are really doing amazing things. One of the things that I think needs to happen are audits. Maybe that's not the right word, but we need, what the Berliners have done is they set out to figure out who owns our city. So thousands of tenants came together, and actually it's happening across Germany, in cities across Germany. Thousands of tenants, I think 7,000 tenants, have started to document who own their cities. That's a really good first step, for example. I think, Sana, you mentioned this Clear Springs company, Clear Springs something home, I don't know what they're, that does housing for vulnerable populations, asylum seekers in particular. I would be investigating them quite closely, and other actors. What do they own? What do they control, etc. But I'm going to let Fredrik weigh in about the film.
Yeah, I mean, the film has been out, and the UK is actually a bit late in the journey of this film. We just had the release in the UK when the virus hit the world. But for example, in Sweden, the film has been shown, I think, to mayors in most cities. Different departments of the city administrations have seen the film. The architects associations have organized tons of screenings to universities. We showed the film in the Swedish parliament. But this is the same as happened also in Germany, in Switzerland, in Austria, in Canada a lot, but also in South America. So the film has been used by people who want to change their cities, but also to invite the mayors. We were actually with a housing minister in El Salvador showing the film. So we've been to many, and Mexico is also, we had a lot of things going on. And so use the film. There is a UK distributor who really wants you to use the film, to book it, show it for your mayors, for your city architects, or the tenant movements, for example, here the tenant movements have used the film a lot. So the cool thing with the film is that people actually very quick start to talk about their own city. So you have this global thing, but you can actually go straight into your own town. And if you use what Leilani said, this kind of mapping of who are the owners in my town, then you will see that the ownership have shifted in your town from local to global.
Thank you. Hold on, I am not muted, am I? Professor Breckel, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, hi there.
Hi.
Could I go back to pension pots, please? And also strategy. So obviously academics often work in teams, but we perhaps don't have the mandate of being a UN Special Rapporteur or the resources of the film. And I'm really interested about how we can make a shift through different networks. So the pension question is really significant where I work in Asia. So we've done research that showed that residential real estate is being invested in by European pension pots. And these buildings are made with bricks that are made by debt bonded workers. And these buildings are being built on a lake which has been forcibly evicting 10,000 people. So this is in Cambodia. So a very, very well-known pension company has a large stake in some of the buildings that we've been tracing. And so what tactics do we use as academics? How can we learn from, how can we make a shift? So we've been trying to get pro bono legal representation, which we now have, to put a complaint formally to the UN. Media, but I'm trying to find the tools that maybe an academic could grasp, and what can we learn from you about how to do that? Thank you.
Thank you. Half of the money on the world's global stock markets are pension money, but it's a lot of money out there. And that money is run with this kind of asset managers, and they are like some guys sitting with tons of billions, and they just have to find ways where they can grow it. And they are then pitched by other guys who come and say, I can give you return on your capital. And then they're selling these kind of financial products. And of course, it's very hard for these asset managers to understand exactly where their money will land, because these financial products are so complicated. So I think the way for all of us, for academics, for journalists, for filmmakers, for Leilanis of the world, is to show people what is going on and show who are the new owners. Because the new owner seems to be a company with a local name, but actually this guy is just going to some fund. I mean, I tell a story about, before it closed down, we were in the Czech Republic, me and Leilani, in Prague. And we found out that a Swedish company based here in Malmö actually had just bought 44,000 apartments in the coal miners region in outside of Prague. 44,000 apartments. They bought it from Blackstone. So Blackstone had owned them for 4 or 5 years. So, so if a Swedish company can go out to the financial market and ask for money to buy 44,000 apartments, it's insane, and it happens, and it always flies under the radar. The journalists don't understand. It's not really a local story. So I think what we should do is to tell these stories, lift them up, explain, follow the money. Who are the real owners of this? And I think in the end we will understand, because when we were editing the film, my film editor, who had his pension fund in a union-owned cooperative pension fund, he found out that he was actually owning Blackstone shares, you know, editing Push. So we were all kind of involved in this. So I think, and I mean, there is some NGOs who are actually looking to the financial sector. Fair Finance is an NGO called, and they are looking into, there was a story now about the ethical funds. They found out that also the ethical funds had money in Blackstone, and in Blackstone's agro-business investments in Brazil, in Amazonas. You know, so it's like you think you go green, and then you're part of burning down Amazonas. But if you can tell that story, people will divest. People will go crazy because nobody wants to be part of burning down Amazonas. So I think it's about storytelling, and I think we can go there.
So
and we need your help. We need your help.
We need filmmakers who are journalists to work with academics.
Well, can I just weigh in on that, actually? Sana and Catherine, thanks for your question. I actually think that in my years as an advocate, I've started to understand how we make change. And it's generally through unlikely alliances and coordinated strategies and collective action. I do think there can be a perfect storm, and I think Fredrik and I have been lucky in that we've helped to create the perfect storm in a few places. And for me, the perfect storm, it can change, the ingredients can change, but generally you need a variety of ingredients. Research is super important, solid academic research. And I don't know about your research, and I'm really hoping you're going to send, I'm going to put my email address in the chat as well, and I'm really hoping you're going to send it to me, because it's totally up my alley and super important that I know these things. But we start with research. We have a film. We need media. You need really good advocates. You need people whose names are well known. And I've been telling people that they should be exploiting my global reputation, because I can contact journalists and say, you know, hey, here's the story. And journalists are, I mean, they're so underpaid, they're so overworked, they're looking for leads. I mean, right? And I actually think journalists play a hugely important role here. I also ask academics to understand their work in the context of human rights. There's a lot of work going on through spatial geography, for example, sociology, even progressive finance research, none of which actually takes on board the fact that we're dealing with a human right. There are human rights standards, that's the strength here, because that's how we hold governments accountable. Human rights are important, not because they've been articulated just, you know, they're important because they are the accountability mechanisms themselves. Governments have signed and ratified all sorts of international treaties. They've said they're committed to this stuff. If you just use any old framework, you don't get government accountability. And so I'm imploring researchers as well as other advocates and Fredrik knows I talked a lot about this at the beginning of the making of the film, how important it was to me that the film convey not the right to the city, but that housing is a human right, because the right to the city is not a human right that states and governments have signed on to, but housing is, and let's use it for God's sake. So especially given how important it is to human life, the pandemic exposing that in such stark ways.
Thank you. Bob, Professor Brown, I should say. We can't hear you.
Got it. Sorry about that. My name is Professor Robert Brown. I teach together with Sana here at the University of Plymouth and see several current students, former students, whatever, in the field. Nice to see. I want to pick up on the comments that both Fredrik and Leilani were raising related to kind of sense of responsibility and unholy alliances and right to the city. And I'll say in advance, I'm going to start this with a provocation, so please don't react until you hear the end, because what I'm going to say at first might be taken the wrong way. But picking up on this idea of sense of responsibility, and I want to, sorry, I'm an academic, so of course I'm going to do this. Read a few lines here about narratives of heroes in opposition to industrialization, urbanization, modernity, globalization, and as Ruth Finnegan says, most menacingly of all, the witch figure of international capitalism. And go on, say here, while such rhetoric may sit well with certain ideologies, it fails, and this is from David Harvey, because it abstracts from the dialectics of place and space and treats one side of the antinomy as a self-sustaining entity with causal powers. Now, my reason for raising all of that is it's very easy to point fingers. They're the bad guy, you know, and okay, we have figures like Donald Trump that serve that very well, but it's easy to kind of point at that. And you know, watching that film last night, it made me think, crikey, I've got a pension fund, as does my wife. You know, where is our money? I don't even know, you know, and that's really got me thinking. And actually, I may be the problem here. So yes, it's easy to point a finger at Blackstone, but I may be complicit in this. And we can decry the presence of McDonald's or other such things, going off on a tangent, but crikey, people are eating there. We, you know, stop eating there, the problem goes away. Well, or maybe if we stop investing in certain ways, maybe the problem starts to dissipate. So I think part of my argument here is we need to recognize our own role, as well as these kind of witches that we set up, or bad guys that we set up saying they're the problem. No, we may be part of the problem. But I think trying to turn this into something a bit more positive, want to put forward the idea of what I would call a joined up or dialogical approach. And my suggestion of this draws upon my experience of doing community development here in the UK, but also in Africa and India, and doing some research on that. And what we found was, if a project's going to succeed, unless it's top down with lots of money behind it, if a project's going to succeed, particularly something that's community oriented, it has to be joined up, which is where Leilani is mentioning the unholy or unlikely alliances. And also they benefit from having champions, which I think is also your reference to advocates. These were the two things we found in Africa and India, and I would argue in the UK, that made projects work, i.e. you can't do it alone. You have to find partners to make this happen, because the problems are multidimensional. They're not singular. We can talk about housing, but actually housing is connected with so many other issues: health, employment, nature of the city itself. So we have to think in a holistic way. And so we have to think about how we can start to make these sort of connections and bring in various partners. And there's people like John Forrester, has a book, in case anybody's interested, Dealing with Differences. And there's others that talk about this, that say, yes, we can set up these oppositions, but actually, ultimately, we need to bring various players into this to make it work. And some examples I can think of in the UK where that's happened is Coin Street on London South Bank, which I think is a fantastic example of a community working together with local authority government and various partnerships. And 20 years on, they are a big player with corporations like IBM, ITV Television. You know, they sit at the same table with them. They began as this community group in opposition. And I think key to one of the things they did, the very first act in terms of coming together once they got hold of this land, was actually reach out to the people that had been their enemies. And another good example here in the UK is a place called the Eldonian Village in Liverpool, which again is another good example of a community working together with the powers that be to make it happen. So my argument here, and the provocation is there, as part of the discussion, an idea of reaching out to the very people that we may think are the enemy, whether that's the city governments that you're already doing, and good for you, but is it also even about reaching out to some of the developers who we can easily cast as the bad guys in it, and or the people themselves that are investing in those development companies? That's probably enough for now, so thank you.
Thank you. I think we split like this. I take number one and you take number two. Is that okay, Leilani? So are we complicit? Yes, we are, of course. We are all a part of the game. And we are also, I mean, my pension funds are also part of this. And if they grow, I'm happy. But what I then find out is that also my costs are going up all the time. That's a little problem. And of course, what these big guys are doing, they are investing a lot of money into the political language through their think tanks, through their lobbyists, and so on. And that language that they have created also makes us talk their language. And so, but if we listen to Professor Stiglitz, he explains quite simple. The average salary hasn't gone up for the last 10 years, but these guys are 100 times richer. It's like an extreme development that is happening at this moment. So, and that's not good for us, and that makes us and them in many ways. But in the film, Saskia is also talking about the monster. You know, it's like you can't even touch it. There is no face, and of course we are also part of this monster cloud up there. So, but to change this, we have to do a lot of things, and I will leave that to Leilani for your other part of the provocation. So go on, Leilani.
Thanks. Actually, I'm going to weigh in on the complicity thing. I do think maybe there's something to be said for complicity. It's not where I have aimed my work. And the reason is because governments sign and ratify international human rights treaties that codify certain human rights, and they are accountable. And they have created the language, and they are complicit with the Blackstones of the world, and they have created the structures, and they have created the system. And, you know, I like to aim, I only have so much energy and so much time. And so I have to aim somewhere. And so I aim at governments, all levels of government. And I say, you have the international human rights obligations and you are accountable. It doesn't mean that I don't, you know, want to engage everyday people, of course, and that's very much what the film is about. And as Fredrik said, it's so important that we spread a different language and start using a different frame. But I don't want the average homeowner, for example, to be feeling like all guilty. Oh my God, I own a home and my home has increased in value, double, you know, in a short period of time. And that's bad. And I just don't think that's where I want people's energy to go. But that's a personal thing as an advocate. In terms of reaching out to, in quotes, enemies, I mean, you saw in the film, I did try to reach out to Blackstone, and in fact, tried many times afterward. And Fredrik can speak to Blackstone's reaction to the film, which they have seen, and what they've done since, and no, they haven't met with me, and they probably never will. I am really interested in conversations with real estate agents, with progressive investors. I will speak to anyone who's willing to speak with me. I'm very open. One of the things I don't agree to is I don't make deals with the devil, because the devil will try to get out of their human rights obligations and will try to water down human rights obligations. So I've worked very closely with several governments, for example. I've worked very closely with the government of Canada, which is not as progressive as many would think. And the agreement I reached with them is that I'm willing to work with them once they're willing to recognize housing as a human right. And I worked a really long time to get them to recognize that housing is a human right. But then we can play ball together. And then I'm willing to sit on this committee or invite them to this meeting that I'm hosting, et cetera. But we have to have that agreement that housing is a human right.
Wonderful, thank you. Saskia, you had a question?
Hi, yeah, I'm Saskia. I'm doing a PhD in human geography at Royal Holloway. Thank you so much for the film. It was really interesting. It made me think about a lot of different things. I'm from London, and the Grenfell Tower tragedy was obviously it's a big deal where I'm from. I guess two of the main things I thought when I was watching the film was, and what you were just saying, Leilani, about getting governments to listen. I guess I'm very pessimistic about the idea that a government like the British government would at all be interested in someone who thinks housing is a human right, because it's so clear that our government has absolutely no conception of housing as a human right. The people who died in Grenfell Tower, in some countries that would have sparked something like the Black Lives Matter movement that we've seen now gripping the UK as well as lots of other countries in the world. But our government, like our Prime Minister, didn't even go to meet the victims. People who live in social housing are seen as disposable. And I don't really see anything changing that with the government the way it is at the moment. So I was wondering what your thoughts are in terms of, and also, our government is actively trying to get rid of the idea of human rights as a thing. So how do you work with people who are just so ideologically opposed to everything you have to say? And the other thing I thought, I guess, was more a narrative question about the film, that obviously in terms of the kind of boom in house prices and real estate is relatively recent, as we can see from the way housing prices have exploded in cities across the world in the past sort of 20 years. But I guess what I thought was really fascinating was that you very much pitched the narrative as a kind of Keynesianism and sort of managed economies. You didn't get these kinds of problems with housing, and then you get the kind of liberalization that happens and then everything becomes commodity. Whereas I think you can see from cities like London that actually under in the kind of post World War II settlement, people were being planned out the city then as well. People's homes were not seen as something that they deserve to have any control over. People were moved out into the suburbs. And also, a country like Britain has been involved in the expropriation of land and people's homes for hundreds of years. So I guess I was wondering, is that what was behind the narrative choices in the film that positioned this as a kind of new phenomenon? If that's not too annoying a question to have to answer. Okay, sorry, that's me.
It's fine. You start, Leilani. You go first. Then Grenfell.
Sure. Sorry, and I was taking all sorts of notes, and now I've lost the original first question. So
it was about working with governments and actors who
yes, the UK government and its intransigence around human rights. Yes, a familiar topic to me. When I was rapporteur, the UK on occasion refused to engage my reports. When there's a formality, normally you present a report and then certain governments will take the floor and they'll say something like, we thank the rapporteur and welcome her report. And the UK on a couple of occasions, particularly the one report I wrote about the relationship between the right to housing and the right to life, they took the floor and they said, we do not welcome this report. So there you go. I will say this, so it's hard to work with some governments, and The UK has a long history of not recognizing housing as a human right, not recognizing any positive obligations with respect to human rights. In other words, not recognizing that they might actually have to do something to make sure people have access to adequate housing. And that dates back certainly to Thatcher, if not before. That being said, not all Conservative members of Parliament are equal. And I urge people to always find those Conservative members of Parliament who might be more amenable to human rights language and if not the language, the concepts themselves. I have sat across from very Conservative governments and very Conservative politicians, and I have yet to have a single politicians say to me they think homelessness is a good thing. If I say to them, so you've got homelessness, there's people on the streets. As I was walking to your office, I was walking by all sorts of people living on the street. That's a violation of the right to housing. It's a violation of human rights. None of them say, nah, that's not an issue. We don't care. So you find your starting points with Conservatives. The means of getting to the right place are often different between Conservatives and Progressives. I try really hard not to draw bright lines between, I don't wear any particular political stripe, and I try not to draw bright lines between me and other people. And I will say, I have a family relationship with a member of Parliament in Boris Johnson's government, an MP of some stature, and you guys can Google and try to figure out who he is. But he is reasonable, and he and I have had many housing conversations, and he and I see eye to eye on many things. So it is possible. You just have to look for the good seeds.
And about my narrative choices in the film, one of the very, very first choice is to try to zoom away from national politics. So if you tell a story about the UK, you have to tell it in a way so it actually also resonates in other countries. And the same goes wherever we go. I'm looking for a global pattern. So in one way, you have to simplify a bit. You have to go away from some local complications and history, because if you try to involve that, you will get lost, or you will lose your audience. And the film has to keep the audience all the time. That's the big challenge. So probably there will be a UK filmmaker who can make a more deeper film about the UK housing politics. But that was never my intention. So, but the interesting thing, as I said before, this film has the ability to make people talk about their own city anyway. And then you will have the local experts who know the local history of your town and so on. Well, that was a short answer.
Thank you both. I'm just conscious of time, but I would like to mention this just because Saskia just mentioned it. Just last Sunday, it was the 3rd anniversary of Grenfell. And till today, there are people who are still living in temporary accommodation who haven't actually managed to, be found a permanent home. So I
can add a thing about Grenfell. So the guy you meet in the film, Nicholas Burton, who's been one of the spokesperson of the one of the most respected members of the community of Grenfell. He was also in the little group that met with Theresa May shortly after the fire. Nicholas was doing a lot of media together with us in London when we released the film, and he was supposed to travel the country with the film. He's really engaged in the housing issue now. He wasn't that before. And I think he wasn't even, he's not a left winger. I think he's been voting Conservative his whole life. I don't think he's doing it anymore. But I mean, he's not coming into this from some kind of party role. He's just, he got this experience, and from that he's also seen this kind of global pattern. And the cool thing with him is he actually traveled the world for a year, and he met with people all around the world, and with the fire brigades in many cities around the world, talked about Grenfell in many broadcasts, shows and so on. And he came back with a global story about the unfairness of housing in many other countries. So you should invite him if you organize a screening in Plymouth. I think he would come.
Yeah, that's a brilliant one. We probably will. We're expanding on this subject within our research, so certainly there will be some of that. I also like to just last thing, because I'm conscious of time and your time. It kind of struck me when I was watching it that even though there wasn't a clear focus or mention on refugees or asylum seekers, which is kind of the subject of my research, let's say, every single aspect of the film had something to do with it, because it was around the social injustice in those communities that usually is where asylum seekers and refugees are housed. It's basically the poor parts of any city. That's where, cheap accommodation is available, and therefore lots of other problems can happen from that. So I saw the link through that, but just going last wrap of kind of thoughts, the subject of this UK National Refugee Week is Imagine. The theme is Imagine. So how do you, Fredrik, imagine a new world where there is equal power structure through your films, through your documentaries?
No, and now I'm supposed to say something really smart and wise. I'm imagining myself with a drink, with an umbrella on the beach.
We'll organize that.
No, but I believe in dreaming of a better world, and I think we all should do that. Otherwise, there's a risk you become cynical, and I think cynical people normally don't change the world. So I think we should still believe that change is possible. And I think we hear in the film the message from Milton Friedman, and which then was copied by Thatcher and Reagan, which is like some deregulation of everything, which has been the motto for, like, we've heard that for 40 years now. And we still hear it, that the solution to the housing crisis is less rules, less rules, less rules. So I think the answer will be more rules, more democracy, more engaged politicians, parliaments. So I think the dream is a more functioning representative system. Actually, democracy, I would say, is the answer. And we need to, our lawmakers are now so much in the hand of the storytelling of the lobbyists, and also a lot of media is in the hands of the storytelling of the lobbyists, which makes it harder for everyone. So again, is our counter language is important, and the dreaming should be there also, that we could do that better and stronger.
Wonderful. What about you, Leilani?
I like what Fredrik said, actually. And one of the things I've tried to do with the shift is to ensure that we're like a good news story, that we're not kind of cynical and downers, that we are kind of dreamers to some degree, but practical dreamers. And I have a really strong sense of that. I'm not to like whatever, look for sympathy, but I actually over the last 6 years have sacrificed a lot to try to change things. And I would hope that is because I have a sense, having a couple of children, that I have a sense that we can build a better world. And I'm not really satisfied to live in a shitty kind of world. I'm not. And I do get kind of enraged when governments go down the wrong path, et cetera. But my sense is that, that we do need to dream and be sort of positive about the potential that's out there all the time, and then use that as our springboard. Doesn't mean we don't end up engaging in tough conversations. But I think we're so close now. Like when I think of how human rights has gained currency, even while there's a total division, because there's a huge movement more toward human rights and a more caring societies. I think the pandemic actually is part of that. And there is this total pushback, but I think we are gaining strength, those of us with this other vision for the world. So yeah, I think it's important to use that as your motivation versus anger or cynicism.
Fantastic. Thank you all, and thanks to everyone who joined us. We're absolutely thrilled to have both of you with us, and we'll keep conversations continuing. If you want to email me about anything, happy to have continue discussions. I did email a feedback form. It's a very short feedback form that we have. So if you please can fill that for us, that would be brilliant, so that we can gather some information just on how you felt the event went. And thanks again to Leilani and Fredrik. If there is an audience, there will be lots of clapping here.
Thank you very much. And please come back. We are both on social media, especially on Twitter. So tag us, and if you have stories that you want us to share, also push the film and make the shift. So we are happy to follow your work also. Thank you.
Fantastic.
for inspiring.
We'll definitely continue conversation, Leilani, on the shift offline. And I know a lot of people here. Karen just posted quite a lot of information from the local community, and I've been speaking with her around that. So we'll be in touch. And Fredrik, the same with Plymouth Arts Centre, probably will be interested in showing this.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye.